Human fact, the oldest flute is 60,000 years old, while the earliest indication of humans wearing pants is 20,000 years ago, indicating for 40,000 years humans were running around making music with no pants on. That is true. Minus 20 Celsius outside right now. Start to get frostbitten very easily. Yeah, wrong foot going black.
bring an update.
Uh-oh. Technology. It loves to give us the middle finger.
Okay, how about... that does not count as scuff. I am not a scuff king. But, yeah, it's one of those things that happens where it just goes to default. Hopefully you all can hear me now. But I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra. With me is, of course, the man asking you your probing questions, Nephenor.
Oh no.
And
Not much of a scuff, did we?
no, and I'm looking at it. It's if it's still not showing anyone, then nothing. Then we're just gonna have to play it by ear or something. But as I was saying, this week is our in between thing, our 3-in-1 rule, and I wanted to cover this one because the Japanese TTRPG scene is a very fascinating beast. One that, if all you know is D20 brain rot, you are going to be in the rudest of awakenings. I had mentioned that Call of Cthulhu has a much bigger foothold over there than D&D does. D&D hasn't had a major foothold since the 80s. I know some people will bring up the Mystara beat-em-ups that Capcom did. That is an isolated case. And that was...
A lot of it has to do with the fact that Chaosium actually did provide Japanese translations.
They provided Japanese translations, but I'd say a bigger thing, you don't need minis and a map for Call of Cthulhu.
That's true, it's very theater of the mind.
You also only need 2 dice.
No, you need the whole set except for the D12.
Yeah. And... But I'd say the bigger thing about it is the fact that going all the way back to the I'd say the 60s or 70s, there was already a very strong mystery fiction subculture within Japan, thanks to Edogawa Ranpo. That was his pen name at the time, obviously, and he made a name for himself by being the translator for a lot of Edgar Allan Poe and Arthur Conan Doyle's writings, hence the name. If some of you are thinking Conan Edogawa, well, that name is kind of a reference to that fact.
They also seem to like horror over there a lot too, so that makes a difference.
I'd say it's a case of different types of horror, and
Lovecraftian works for them.
Yeah. But a lot of people have brain rot about tentacles and want to make that kind of joke because they're still 12 mentally. Or rather 15. But
hey, not everything is about Uratsuki Doji. All the good things.
I still can't believe Testament made a song named after that anime. I'm not kidding. The thrash metal act Testament made in Uratsuki Doji's song.
Not at all shocked. I mean, heck, we have oh god, I can't remember which metal band here made Lovecraft music too. Was it the thing that could not be?
Yeah. But and I've talked quite a bit about various Japanese tabletop. Last year we, for a few months, did a Sword World campaign, with Sword World being one of the biggest homegrown TTRPGs in Japan. And spoiler warning, this won't be the last time I talk about the Japanese TTRPG space, because again, it is a fascinating beast. There's a lot of little moving parts, little fiddly bits that make it so that trying to paint a broad brush with the whole scene doesn't really work because it's too diverse. But there are a few recurring things to note. The first of these is that, unlike in North America, where the TTRPG scene was sprouted from the wargaming scene, from the wargaming scene in the 70s, and from the works of companies like Avalon Hill. That's not what happened in Japan. over in Japan, the TTRPG scene sprung out of the computer gaming scene. Which, to certain grogs, that is going to sound like the height of blasphemy, because there seems to be this hate boner about drawing from video games in any sense, because too limiting or something like that. Which I will always say kind of misses the point. You have a lot of video games for decades have had these very fascinating worlds that people want to explore in interactive form, and wasn't that the pitch that we all had getting into tabletop? Whatever we happen to be fans of, just in an interactive form.
Yeah, and I mean, at the time, of course, the computer limitations didn't allow for it. Now, we've got things like Baldur's Gate 3, which is freaking incredible in terms of being able to explore things.
But the relationship between tabletop and video game goes all the way back to the earliest computers, to the Plato system back in the 70s. And everyone just conveniently forgets that TSR had a whole separate branch just dedicated to computer gaming.
Strategic simulations. I can't remember the third one. I know it was SSI.
Mm-hmm. And they were responsible for a lot of the vaunted gold box games, as they were called. Now, admittedly, some of the gold box games have not held up as well with age as others, but the point still stands. Also, I do have to apologize for the fact that the chat box decided to just not show up. So there it is now. So it had to be completely reset. Apologies for that, folks. It is what it is. I just did a system update, and some stuff wants to be less cooperative than others. But with that said, this is why the idea of taking a video game and adapting it into tabletop, it's not only not a new concept, it's fairly common. And what it ultimately shows further is that from a historian perspective, the 90s were a fascinating and wild time for the TTRPG space as a whole. And I would say that's where the Japanese side of tabletop really starts to come into its own. More in the because homegrown stuff didn't really start until the late 80s, and you didn't see the explosion until the 90s, and especially I'd say due to magazines like Dragon, no, not that one, and Comptique. And I know I've gone over this history lesson before, but I want to make that clear just because one, every episode is someone's first. And two, I want to illustrate that when you're dealing with Japanese tabletop, you can't apply the same assumptions that you could if you were playing, say, D&D. If there's any parallel, I would say it's the indie scene, especially in terms of just sheer diversity of concepts. But the thing that we're going to be covering is a translation of The Legend of Double Moon, or just Double Moon, made by the late Masayuki Onuki, translated by Claytonian. I ended up coming across this thing through the old TG forums, and unfortunately, I haven't been able to find Claytonian JP to give them the credit. So if anyone can get me in touch with them, I would appreciate it. And in fact, let me update the title, because I thought it was all one word, but it really isn't. So and as it starts off on this thing, and I know it might seem odd to do a full thing like this in a one shot, but this is only 55 pages, and there's going to be some skimming. But let me double page this and fit to page. Okay, let me fit to width instead because that's way too small. So Double Moon started off as a series of play-by-posts and replays in a video game magazine called Marukatsu Famicom and its sister publication, Comp RPG. People used to get their characters via postcard. And they do link in a video from Nico Nico Doga that shows a lot of images from the magazine. From there, it got a video game adaptation in the NES, which there is a fan translation of, and it basically plays like Dragon Quest. Like, it's the most blatant Dragon Quest clone you could ask for. And then in '91 we get the TTRPG, which is brings us to the present. And something I do find interesting here is saying this game has a lot of ideas that would later come to be coincidentally explored by 3E D&D, but it has a simplicity that will keep everyone happy. It also holds very true to its video game conventions, as seen like the Battlefield system. Grognards, F20 RPG lovers, and weeaboos alike should have fun. Well, 2 out of those people will have fun. Grognards
never have fun.
No. Because, well, if you know the origin of the term grognard, you know why have them enjoying things is impossible.
Exactly.
The main roles to do things are roll under ability score plus mods on a difficulty determined dice size for non-combat, and roll plus adds over a foe's defenses to hit them in combat. There's a dodge stat, evasion instead of AC, and armor lowers it, but armor also absorbs non-critical damage. So we're once again dealing with a mix of high-low, and this was common around this time. And you saw a lot of this in early RPGs still in the wake of D&D, where people hadn't quite shaken off the wargaming mindsets. Or I suppose a better way to put it is the idea of unified mechanics hadn't quite set in yet. And yeah, sorry about that, Sig. There were some tech issues early on. But right on the next thing, we have a nice little translation of the character sheet. No name, class, human, level, age, life inclination. Which I guess life inclination would be alignment. See, strength, dexterity, agility, intelligence, perception, I think, magic, luck, constitution. I'm not sure what MI is supposed to be. We'll probably get to that later. It looks like we have
Mind.
All right. Then we get to the battle stats. So melee to hit and damage, range to hit and damage, evasion with shield and without shield, soak, i.e. armor points, which isn't affected by shield. Then a list of items, some percentage-based skills. Interesting. Then PowerPoint, magic, and techniques. So power points for arcane and holy magic, and skill points for martial magic techniques. See, so even in 1991, there was an awareness of not having martial characters be the beat stick.
Aww, but that's fun.
Or be the one trick pony, I should say. And Sig, you're not alone with the Dragon Quest vibes. I ended up looking at the fan translation of the video game that predates this, and it is very much Dragon Quest. But let's see, life points, mental points. It is kind of interesting that mental points are not exactly your MP here. But rather essentially SAM. You already have the MP stuff with power points and skill points. And I'm more referring to the fact that and this is another thing I'm glad didn't catch on in the Japanese tabletop space, that idea of the martial character being nothing but basic attack.
Considering that they are so, they're the home of martial arts, it's not surprising that they would give martial characters a lot more flexibility.
What it ultimately shows is that in that kind of regard, there were some people who were ahead of the curve. But it looks like this is a game where you're going to be using the full range of D6s. So then we get character generation. You start at level 0. That's interesting. So the main stats are, so you generate your 6 ability scores by rolling a D10 plus 1D6 to get a score from 2 to 16. That's a interesting die roll. At least it's not 3D6 for the umpteenth time. But the main stats are strength, dexterity, agility, intelligence, perception, and magic. So I was right there. Primary stats can get greater when you level up. So if it's a 1 to 10, modifier is 0. 11 to 12 plus 1, 13 to 14 plus 2, 15 to 16 plus 3, 17 to 18 plus 4, 19 to 20 plus 5. And since we're dealing with 1d10 plus 1d6, I'd like to run a little bit of an experiment. I'm going to go into any dice and see what the probabilities are. So, see if I can get the macro correct. All right. So the most common range in that is 7 to 11, each of them having a 10% chance.
So pretty much the same as the 3d6. Just different range.
Let's see, 7 to 11 on that. As far as a 3d6, what the range is, actually the most common range is 10 and 11 for 3d6. Or at least the highest percentage result.
Yeah, it's a little bit higher, but it's still within the same.
So there's a better chance for width in this system, I'd say.
The bell curve's a little flatter.
Which, given the fact that it sounds like you're going to be getting advancements more easily as you level up, I think it evens out. As opposed to something like D&D, which is very, very stingy about advancing your core stats. Magic items notwithstanding, of course. But after you develop that, there's 3 secondary stats that are determined the same way, but used in calculating survival checks. They are luck, constitution, and mind. After you find the modifiers for your secondary stats, you can add up the modifiers to your class's base survival check numbers in step 3. Secondary stats do not improve with levels, but your survival checks do go up at certain levels. Interesting. Then choose species, and it looks like we're doing the +1 -1 thing that we saw back in 3rd edition with the races.
But or +1 -2 in the case of elf, or +2 -2.
Mm-hmm. But also some class restrictions. If you pick Hornman, you should be a martial class. If you pick elf, you shouldn't be a martial class. And species may affect your XP requirements and class choice later on. Then we choose the class, which affects the base survival check numbers. Um, Add the mods from secondary stats to numbers your class provides in order to determine your survival check scores. For example, a Lux score of 13 means you add 2 to your class's number for Lux survival checks. When you roll to save in this game, roll a d20 at or under the most appropriate score. So, essentially, survival checks are saving throws. Roll under saving throws using a d20. Interesting. You then determine life points and mental points. It sounds like you can use mental points to do special things. But it's 6 to your constitution and mind. Which does mean several things. But whenever you level up, you gain 1d6 more life points, or the bare minimum life point amount for your class. Which means that this actually has a better version of hit dice than, say, D&D has had over the years.
Yeah, I never did like the random.
Yeah. This certainly has the random, but depending on class, the random is a little bit more controlled. Then determine your skill percentiles by rolling a d10 for each of them, getting 1 to 10, and then adding to it a number. They are monster lore is d10 plus 10. In fact, each of these skills is pretty much d10 plus a certain percentage. 10% for monster lore and search, 20% for convince and first aid, 30% for swim, and 30% for horse riding. Thieves and a few other classes have unique percentile skills beyond this set. Thieves choose 3, bards choose 2. And thieves start with appraise 30, backstab 20, hide 30, tail 30, pickpocket 10, trudge quietly 10, climb 60, listen 30, pick lock 20, detect and disable traps 20. Asterisk ones are ones that bards can choose one of, and assassins can choose ones marked with a cross in this text. Then record any class skill points used to cast martial or combat spells, and power points to do rune or white spells that it might provide. For most classes, skill points aren't gained until you're at first level. Then you determine starting gold by rolling d20 times 10 plus 200. Then buy some junk. Determine combat stats, adding in any items that affect them. Melee to hit is your strength mod. Range to hit is your dexterity mod. Evasion is 12 plus agility mod, plus any adds from class. Then choose inclinations, which, yeah, it seems to be kind of like alignment. This is optional. You can choose as many as you like as long as they're not opposed ideals. I actually like that. That gives a lot more depth to characters. And we have a set of pairs here. Justice or tyranny, love or hate, good or evil, middle road or apathy, law or chaos, life or death, existence or void. And then choosing the final bits, name, gender, all of that. You may want to use your birthday's constellation and incorporate it part of your name. The way it seems to go is Pegasus, Dolphin, Sphinx, Phoenix, Basilisk, Crow, Wolf, Dragon, Hydra, Unicorn, Scorpion, and Eagle. In my case, it'd be Dragon, given when my birthday is. So, not beating the dragon allegations. What about yours, Neff?
I don't know. I can't really. For me, it's just. Unfortunately, I would be unicorn, but I don't want to be.
But then we have the breakdown of the classes. And it is, and within it they have the stat preferences, the modifiers to survival checks, and each of them go up at 1 at levels 1, 3, and 5. The evasion bonus, if any, minimum life points gained at each level, and this is where things like fighter and knight can shine here, because you cannot get when you level up, you cannot get less than 4 life points per level.
Yeah, that I appreciate, because I've had a couple times in old D&D games where the wizard outstripped the fighter at level 2 because the DM went straight rolls.
I do remember house ruling that if the roll for certain characters, if the roll is lower than your Constitution modifier, you re-roll it until you get something higher.
The usual one we had was first level, you automatically get max.
Mm-hmm. And of course, in 4E, instead of doing the whole hit die thing, you just gain a set amount each level based on your class and your con mod.
That I can get behind a little more. Mm-hmm. I still like some element of randomness, but I do like it a little more controlled.
Yeah.
This I like.
Mm-hmm. And there's also the list of PowerPoint and skill point setups, and as can be noted here, obviously the casters are going to be getting that, but if you're usually getting one or the other, which does make me wonder if multi-classing is going to be a possibility. And we have quite for a game this simple, for a game this of this time, there's quite a few classes right out of the gate. We have fighter, priest, wizard, paladin, mage, warrior, knight, fencer, martial artist, healer, occultist, and thief. And then it has to go into an aside regarding thief skills. Then bard, ranger, sage, shaman, and a few classes that are designed for NPC use. Though it says Elementor was a choosable class in the mail-in version of the game, so that is Dark Agent, Assassin, Elementor, and Necromancer. And some of them are legit gishes. Paladin and Mage Warrior, for instance, do get power points and skill points. You still have to get past first level to do it, but the option's there. And I have a feeling that I won't have as much of an issue with gishes in this game that I do in the world's most litigious role-playing game. But then we have advancement to level 1 and beyond. Taking out monsters, you split the XP amongst themselves. Whoever did the killing blow gets XP equal to the monster's level. Oh god, that's going to encourage kill confirming.
Yep, yes it is. And that's a good thing. Everyone should always confirm their kills.
Mm-hmm.
Double tap, just to be on the safe side.
But at each level, you get 1d6 plus Constitution mod life points, as mentioned, or the minimum. You also get 1d6 plus Mind mod MP. Part of me wonders if it may have been better served to have that minimum for both LP and MP.
That's actually not a bad idea.
So the mages have a low minimum for LP in this case, but have a high minimum for MP. It's definitely something to consider. And Sig says Gish. I'm unfamiliar with that term. Gish comes from the earliest version of what is known as Gith Zerai, which you should be familiar with, especially if you played.
You cut out there, monk. We didn't hear you.
I was saying Gish is tied to Gith Zerai. That's where the origin of the term comes from. Gith Zerai and Gith Yankee. And is used in reference to characters who are equal parts casters as they are fighters. And this particular build is one that's a common fantasy because of its portrayal in other media, but it's one that certain litigious role-playing games struggle with embodying because they just make it so, because they're still in that mindset of balancing across a campaign instead of balancing across levels. And a lot of times they end up with the worst of both worlds. There are some rare exceptions, but they're exceptions for a reason. And it largely comes to the fact that even with the versatility of being decent at both, they don't have anything to unite those two sides, so it just feels like a kit bash. But after that, it does go into. Actually, before I get into that, when you advance, you also roll a d6 and record it in the circle on the character sheet as advancement points. At any time, you may increase a primary stat by spending a number of advancement points equal to the new stat score. You can save the unspent advancement points later and use them when you're ready. You cannot increase secondary stats with this. That is interesting. It means that every time you level up, there is the possibility of being able to increase a primary stat.
That is a nice thing.
That means that if the dice gods are on your side, which they're probably not, you could very easily put in some increases to shore up some of the. It could easily allow you to shore up some of the lower stats a lot more easily than in other games.
Remember, folks, don't pray to RNGesus. Sacrifice to Lucifer.
And you can save them and spend them when you want to. Of course, that's the kind of magic you can use increases for arcane and holy magics. This is every level. For martial magics, this doesn't happen until first level and then every other level. I think they call it martial magics, but I have a feeling this is where things like key techniques in some games would fall into.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Something like that, or the whole you're using energy kind of concept, or rage, or whatever you want to call it from video games.
Mm-hmm. Basically the martial casting thing that got so many people pissed off in the early 2000s with Book of Nine Swords. Because, for reasons I've gone into that I will continue to find hilarious. Of course, then check to see if your 2-hit stats for melee or ranged attacks has gone up. And if you have any thief skills, every time you level up, increase 1 by 5% or gain a new thief skill. And it goes into how you gain levels. It is doing the old habit of, depending on your race, you may level up slowly or more quickly. The other thing that can determine things is if you're using a special class. Those are the ones that had an asterisk. And this sort of differential leveling up, that is very much an artifact of things that came before. And if I'm being honest, I've never been a fan of it. I will always prefer a universal advancement if XP levels are being used. Because imagine how it feels when everybody gets XP and everyone levels up except you, because you're just shy of it due to your class requiring more XP. Again, that whole balancing across campaigns thing.
Yeah, that's one thing that always drove me nuts.
But then we have the power points increase at each level, which is fuel for rune magic and white spells. and determining how much you get. Then the thing for skill points. Since Bard and Thief get 2 at each level, I'm wondering if they're gonna have their own techniques we see later. Then we have the acquisition for Thief skills. For Thief, they get that 5% thing every level, Assassin every other level, and Bard and Ranger every 3rd level. As far as the 2-hit bonus, Fighter and Ranger level up get the 2-hit, get a +1 each level for both melee and ranged. Mage, Warrior, Paladin, and Knight get a melee bonus at every level and a range bonus every other level. Fencer, Martial Artist, and Dark Agent get melee every level and ranged every 3rd level. Bard and Thief get melee every 2nd level and ranged every level. Shaman and Assassin get both every 2nd level. Wizard, Occultist, Elementer, Necromancer, Priest, and Healer get it every 4th level. Sage does not get it. When you reach 1st, 3rd, 5th, or any odd level, add 1 to your 3 survival check numbers. This is why those scores don't get training points. So essentially your saving throws automatically advance every odd level.
Makes sense.
And we also have an optional rule about pulling off multiple melee or ranged attacks, one or the other, during your turn each round, if you have one of the below classes. I know some people will say, isn't this akin to the whole attacks at each level for different classes? On paper, yes, but in practice here, I like that not only do we have that, we have it in a way that makes sense, like there isn't something like 3 attacks every 2 turns, and I have to figure out how that actually works. But instead, we have melee and ranged options all of the time. So, for example, look at the fighter can do 3 melee attacks or 3 ranged attacks. Because it isn't stated here, I'm going to operate under the assumption that you could switch. You know, melee attack 1, then ranged attack another, then melee attack a 3rd one. I think that's not what's intended here, but that's how I would handle it. And then Martial Artist has a total of 6 melee attacks at level 11, which I can't think of many games that are going to get that ridiculous. But I think we can safely say that the basic fighter joke isn't as applicable here. And then we have a few descriptions of some of the classes. Pretty standard fare here. It should note that Mage Warrior uses rune magic. And is more focused on melee than ranged attacks.
So they're kind of like like a Viking warrior using the power of ancient runes.
I'd say let's go one further. They're the Scotsman.
Aye, laddie, I like the way you think. Even if Zan hates the way I sound.
Yeah. But then we have that but the Mage Warrior and Paladin, their magic can't get higher than 3rd level. third level of a wizard or third level of a priest. And some descriptions of the species. Though aside from the stat change, they do have a few modifiers. Their XP penalty is even worse if they choose a magic class. For, say, Hornmen, they're not suited for magic. But after an 8-hour rest, they gain 1d6 times level LP. If you're level 0, this counts as first level for this. Fair Elven, which are a more fairy type of elf, has dark vision. We all know how dark vision works.
What's your elf IC?
Half elf has dim vision, essentially dark vision, but only 50 meters as opposed to 100 meters. Then going into some of the other optional classes. Fencer might be an appealing one to some because they take no penalty when attacking with their offhand.
That's okay. I'm actually right-handed.
Mm-hmm. Occultist is a mage that uses occult magic. Healers use their own magic, and I am seeing a pattern here that we also saw in Sword World, where instead of a universal casting list, you have each magic style associated with its own spell list. Which I know 5e tried to do that, but it did that by forcing the shared spell list into individual classes, and kind of created a future-proofing problem. Which we definitely didn't see that in Sword World with all the different types of casting that was available. But as far as the Sage is meant to be the castiest caster because they can use rune magic, white magic, and their own sage magic.
So wizard with subclass wizard.
But they do. Shamans have their own shaman magic, and rangers have their own ranger magic. And you know how rangers kind of gotten a bad run over the years? I don't think this particular version of ranger is going to have that problem. But it is definitely a advanced class, and Sage is definitely for those who want to do, I'd say, all of these supplement book classes. I would not have anyone do those in their first run. But combat is next, and it is described as much like a turn-based RPG. And it is also doing the two row setup that I was doing in Legend Edition, and we were doing in Sword World as well. So there is precedent for what I was doing. But as far as the attacks, it is a roll to hit, d20 plus modifiers versus a foe's evasion. And if you hit, deal LP damage according to the weapon you use, but reduce that damage by the foe's AP score if you didn't crit. So I think crits just armor pierce. They don't add additional damage. And let me go back and see how evasion was calculated. So give me a moment. I need to go a few pages back. So evasion is 12 plus your agility mod. So when it comes to that, you are rolling high for certain skill checks and rolling low for others. And when it comes to magic combat, you do roll as applicable. It's usually a survival check, so a saving throw. And reduce your power points as per the spell cost, but if you spend 1d6 MP, you only spend half of your power points. Or half of the required power points. It's not stated here, but I'm assuming the minimum power point expenditure is 1.
That would make sense.
But I do like that use of MP there, because it means that you can cast spells on the cheap, but you are playing with RNGs that's trying to do that. Because imagine if you do that, you end up rolling that 1d6 MP cost and end up rolling a 6. For a good amount of characters starting out, it seems, that's going to blow through a good chunk of your MP. But let's see. Then we have some of the other actions that are possible. But let's see, if you go into negative HP, you have to make a survival check, roll at or below the survival number on the d20 or pass out. If your negative LP is equal to your constitution score, then you die. Negative 8 MP is treated the same way, but with a mind-based saving throw and death at a negative mind score. So another reason why you shouldn't be blowing through your MP, because you can go through MP kills if you're not careful.
That could be entertaining.
Mm-hmm. But there are some other things you can use MP for. You can spend it. You can spend it to turn a miss into a hit. Reduce the damage you take from an attack by half after it's been reduced by defenses. Take the initiative or go first in a round. Double your chances to pass a check before you roll. You can then spend MP again after rolling and still failing if you want to triple the chances. And each of these cost 1d6 MP. So you do have those options. Then we have special combat rules. Surprise attacks are done as a perception check. Though, because of the fact that it's done as a perception check, you can potentially negate a ambush. So it's not like they just get one complete free hit. Of course, the other way can happen. And I like this because we've seen plenty of times in fiction where somebody tries an ambush and then it ends up backfiring on them. Neff, are your cats staring at you again?
No, they're just being weird. Biting at my feet.
I do like how dual wielding is handled here. If you attack with a weapon in each hand, it's just a -2 penalty.
That is a little easier than dealing with the other ways of doing it.
Because let's be honest, the dual wielding fantasy is going to be something that's ingrained with a lot of people. Now the whole you can't wield anything bigger than a short sword in your offhand, I would probably house rule that in the sense that unless you're playing a fencer, you have that limitation. Because it's very clear fencers are purposely designed for dual wielding, so they should be able to wield like 2 long swords. But the extra attack for dual wielding is only once per round, no matter how many attacks your level might allow. And looks like I was right. If you roll a natural 20 on an attack, you ignore AP. If a NPC rolls a crit against you, they do double damage. And after that, we have a list of potential weapons and the like. And who can use it. Then a similar thing for armors and shields. I like that cape is a armor. Armor provides modifiers to evasion and grants armor points.
It is a different take. I'll give them that.
And much like a console RPG, it's listing off who can equip what. Then we have a thing for just other types of equipment. You know, the miscellaneous equipment and how much it costs. Standard fare, I'd say.
Like a 10-foot pole?
Mm-hmm. Then non-combat checks. You roll a difficulty die at or under one of your scores. The size of the die depends on the difficulty of the task. If it's a simple task, 1d6. An average, d10. A difficult, d20. A legendary task, d100.
I like that they actually do it that way. That's nice to actually have different dice for different levels of check.
Essentially, you're rolling one of these, and you're trying to get under your Actually, let me double check to make sure I'm not talking out of my ass. Yeah, you are trying to roll. You're trying to roll under your score. So if you get which is why I agree with them when they say failing a simple roll would be pretty embarrassing, especially if you've got a score of like 11. Like, how the fuck do you fail on a d6 roll on an 11?
That would take some serious skill to fuck up that badly.
Mm-hmm. It also shows that it's more likely you're going to be trying to do these sort of checks for average or difficult, depending on your ability scores. And for thief skills, those are always percentile ones. Something you are going to be very familiar with.
I love my D percentiles.
But then we have the setup for the different types of magic and how often they can get it. Starting with the rune magic spells, which and obviously the spell list is incomplete because well, this was a fan translation that was never completely finished, but you can kind of get the gist here. And most of the spells here only cost 3 power points at their basic. I think there was supposed to be new levels at each one. But again, what I'm reminded of here is why, for Legend Edition, I use the term spell rank, because it can get confusing when there's levels of spells and levels for characters. And I've seen many times where people get the two cross-wired. But then we have a similar thing with white magic, and all of these spells here that are listed are the level 1 spells. But in terms of getting spells, it's usually you're picking a number of spells based on your modifiers, and getting a new spell at certain levels.
I like the thief magic. That makes me happy inside.
Yeah. We have that. We have fighting magic, it's kind of funny that you brought up Flame Slash earlier, Sig, because the first fighting magic spell is Flame Blade.
Thunderblade!
So, but then we have combat magic, not to be confused with fighting magic. This is essentially the key abilities for the martial artist. Then we have thief magic, which is described as a backup to when your percentile thief rolls fail, but you still have the SP to force success. As long as you are level 0 to level 2, you know all the thief magics of first level. Once you reach character level 3, all second level thief magics become available to you. If you want to use thief magic, it takes 1d6 rounds and you can't do other actions at that time. But you can have the time by spending 1d6 MP. So, if anything, the thief ends up having the most casting range.
Well, I mean, they're thieves. They stole everything.
Mm-hmm. But then we have a similar thing with occult magic, which works the way you'd expect. Then bard spells, which of course do require an instrument. Then healer's spells.
Just remember, a piano is an instrument.
Yep. Sage magic. There's only two spells available for Sage, and you need to be at least 3rd level to use the second one. First one is Magic Darts, which doesn't cost any power points, and each of them does 1 damage per level you have, up to 3 damage. No modifiers are added to this damage, but it does ignore AP. So essentially, sages are the only ones who get access to Magic Missile. And I'd actually say in this case, Magic Darts, which are basically Magic Missile, have a much better effect than they do in the world's most litigious role-playing game. It's 3 damage. It is it's admittedly 1 damage per level up to 3, technically, but it ignores AP. And because of that, you can use it each round, since it doesn't cost any points.
That is useful.
Mm-hmm. But then we have shaman magic, which works the way you'd expect, and
without totems.
Yeah, and ranger magic, which they describe more akin to special skills or abilities than magic, which is why they use SP and not PP. And after that is a collection of replays. Replays, for those who aren't familiar, are essentially an actual play in text form. These are significantly popular in Japan, even now. There's still plenty of replays going about. I know because I just added a translation of one for Sword World into my collection. And if I'm being honest, I think replays helped TTRPGs get a foothold in Japan because it was a way to experience the approach without having to go through the lengthy affair of an actual play or a play by post or anything like that. So it's something you could read on the train. But after that, they go into monsters. It seems that unlike that, monster damage is listed as it, but anytime that there's multiple approaches on how it can work. It could be a straight damage. It could be 2 attacks that deal separate types of damage, or 3 attacks. It could be a damage roll plus modifier or multiplier. But it seems a lot of the character stats aren't present. The monsters have a more simplified stat block, which I'm perfectly fine with. And what also helps the simplification is when it comes to rolling to hit, it's basically d20 plus level. So that allows things to be pretty simple for the GM, and anything that makes the GM's job easy is going to be nice. But then they go into some more detail about some of the NPC classes, though the Elementor isn't quite finished. And then finally we have a little table of contents, and that more or less covers the Legend of Double Moon TTRPG. I realize that this translation was a little bit jank, and there's a lot of stuff missing, and it's very incomplete in a lot of places. But it does provide a baseline for how it's going to work. And before I get into my thoughts on this translation of the Legend of Double Moon, putting aside the jankiness of this being a conversion of a Google Doc, what did you happen to think about this?
Definitely had a lot of things that I liked about it. I mean, it was a different take than what I'm used to seeing.
Anything stand out?
The fact that they weren't afraid to use more than 1 dice.
There is that, especially a lot of Japanese tabletop likes to use D6s, mostly because they were the easiest die to get. Especially
that's one thing that drove me nuts.
Which is understandable, but keep in mind, for a long time, getting a more complex polyhedrals, especially in more rural parts of Japan, would be tricky.
I know. I just love my shiny math rocks.
But since this was going with the full range, I'm guessing by 1991 that problem wasn't as much of a problem at that point. I'm not going to say it wasn't a problem, but I guess the issue was lightened by that point. I would say there's a lot of potential for this, and I would love to see like a cleaned up retro clone of what's present here. I do think some of the high-low stuff does need to be addressed in some form, but that's only because that sort of high for some, low for others has kind of fallen out of favor. Most systems are going to put their foot down on about whether or not they're roll high or roll low for the majority of their rolls.
Yeah, it is nice to have a little consistency when it comes to that.
Yeah. There's definitely some DNA of early D&D I can see, because although I said D&D didn't really have a foothold, the last big foothold it had was during the basic era.
Good old Redbox.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Redbox. AD&D did eventually get translated, but by the time it came out, other games had already entered the Japanese market. So they kind of beat it to the punch there. And when it comes to what we've got here, this is very much D20. This is very much D20 focused. I'd be fine with it. I'd be fine with it staying. The only thing I'm a little bit iffy about is the fact that we're using D20, a variable die thing, and D100 all in the same system.
Nah, that's a good thing. I told you, I love my shiny math rocks.
Oh, I know. I like unified mechanics when it comes to games that I cover. This is not the only time I've had this particular burr up my ass, because I think I said a similar thing regarding Rollmaster, about how even though it's a roll high D100, there's a whole bunch of subsystems regarding different actions that really needed to be cleaned up. And Against the Dark Master more or less did clean that up. If I were to try and do a retro clone of Double Moon, which I'm not putting off the table, the different spell/skill list, that is something I'm keeping. I'd probably add in the minimum roll thing we mentioned with MP. The way advancement points work, I'm definitely keeping that. But I do think that these, maybe it's just me, but part of me thinks that the survival check thing should use the same type of skill roll system that you see with like ability score checks. Because it's the only real time, aside from thief skills, that percentages are used. And with how much D20 is used, I'm really just thinking of, instead of a D100 percentage, just using either a D20 or using something a bit simpler, or bringing the percentile thing into other aspects. The point is that there's a lot that I like with this, but if I was to run Double Moon, I would have to do some significant cleanup and address one particular elephant in the room, and that is multi-classing.
Yeah, that's one that, yeah.
And when it comes to the whole different XP for different races, I'd be fine with throwing that out and just having say the level modifier that some races had back in 3rd edition.
Yeah, that actually could work.
And for those who don't recall, what that basically was is that your the XP to level up threshold started higher, as if you were a certain level, even though you were not. But things like the different classes having access to different spell lists, that is fucking being kept. Especially since it allows for a much easier form of Gish.
Yeah, different the solid lists for each class, that is a nice thing, and I wish more people did that.
Mm-hmm. I can safely say that we're doing that with Legend Edition, given the different spell lists that are available.
Well, I think that has a lot to do with the fact that Final Fantasy had a lot of DNA of these kind of games.
And I think that I'd say if there's anybody else who's really leaned into this, it's Brandon Sanderson's work. with how specialized the different forms of magic in his stories tend to be.
Yeah, that's true. Especially, I'm now on to the Stormlight Archive, and whew, man, that one's got some weird ones.
Oh yeah. So I think now that you've got an understanding of Shardblades, I think you can see what he was going for when he said he wanted a weapon with a cool factor.
Oh yeah, it definitely has a cool factor. And then, of course, finding out where they came from is even more interesting.
Same thing with Shardplate. The idea of power armor in a fantasy setting is something I've always found interesting. I know that one could argue that a knight's armor is akin to power armor, but I don't think it goes far enough. Whereas Shardplate and Stormlight Archive, you got that on. You're borderline untouchable.
Unless you are really, really outnumbered.
But that idea of a unified spell list, I find that the games that I end up preferring don't really use that as much. Like, you know that I'm a big fan of Exalted, and it does have the sorcery list, but depending on what type of Exalt you are, some tiers of spells you're not going to be able to access. And I think a better example would be Legend of the Five Rings, where there are these spell lists for the 5 elements, but depending on what clan you learned your magic from, you're going to be better at some than others. And if you're a Shugenja from the Phoenix clan, well, you're going to be better than everybody else because you have void magic.
Yes. Void.
Yeah. And I don't know if I'm ever going to do it, but I have tooled with the idea of adapting something like Magic the Gathering into tabletop form, or at least adapting elements of it. But I wouldn't be adapting it word for word, obviously. I just feel that there was missed potential. Because when Wizards of the Coast decided to say, "Oh, we're finally doing Magic in TTRPG form," it's just a couple D&D campaign settings, and I don't think that's what people were asking for. But as far as a final note when it comes to Double Moon, I would say if I have to put it in my rating system, I have to put it as playable. You could run a few sessions with this, but if you want to run something high level because of the fact that the spell list isn't there, that is going to be tricky.
Yeah, it's good for a one shot. That's for darn sure.
Mm-hmm. That's why I would pay good money to see someone do a retro clone of this. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody already has done it.
Just finding it's going to be the fun part.
And Balanced Hydra says, I always like the idea of how the color pie in Magic would make a more flexible morality system. It would, but I'm kind of iffy about morality systems as opposed to faction systems. But it is something worth considering. Now that being said, this time next week, we'll be delving further into Weird Space. We're getting close to the end when it comes to that. Let me check the schedule. And yeah, in 1 or 2 weeks we'll have that more or less finished. And it will be on to what we've got coming next. And I hope to see you all for that, as even though we've had some issues with organization, Weird Space has been entertaining. But until then... Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it has been very entertaining, and I love the theme of it.
Mm-hmm. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody.
Soy